Welcome to the Shower Epiphanies podcast, where we explore your hidden thoughts and desires, revealing your greatest drop the mic moments. Now, here's your host, Art Costello.
Welcome to the Shower Epiphanies podcast. Today, Poirier from Canada is with us. He is a TEDx speaker, a Mo Monday speaker, a PMX speaker. He's also the host of the top-rated Conversations with Passion radio show, founder of the speaking program, and has been featured in multiple television specials. A columnist with Entrepreneur and Forbes magazine, he has been featured on CBS, CTV, NBC, ABC, is a Forbes Coaches Council member, and is one of the few leaders featured twice on the popular Entrepreneur on Fire show. He has interviewed over 5,000 of the world's top leaders, and I hope we can talk about that, Corey. Thank you for being on the show today, and can you introduce yourself and tell us your story?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Art. It's an absolute pleasure. And yeah, so I guess an introductory about myself and my story. Well, I guess I was born and raised in a small town. And, you know, when I was growing up, and I'll even go further and say when I was growing up and as I got older, I didn't realize how significant that was. And I guess that's a positive, is that I didn't think when you're born in a small town, that it's harder to make it elsewhere or, to sort of make a name for yourself. But as I got older, and actually even more so in the last 5 years, people have said how significant that is, how much harder it is if you're in a small town to spread your wings, if you will. But like I said, I never used to mention it because I didn't think it was that big of a thing. But yeah, I was born in a small little town. And when I say small, I mean, it's all relative, but it was a city. They called it a city. But I think we had less than 3,000 people. So I don't know how much that qualifies for as a city. But having said that, where I actually was born was the outskirts of that place. And so the population would have been in the hundreds, for instance. And, there's smaller, obviously, towns than that. I mean, I know of a town that has like 50-some people, but it's still fairly small. And it's actually a small part of Canada as well. And so smallest province in Canada. So I grew up there and I was raised by a single mother. And my grandfather, very active in my life, became sort of my surrogate father, if you will. I mean, helped me get my license, helped me learn how to drive a standard car, and just really took on that role in my life of a father figure. And those two people really molded most of my life. My mother, I watched her go through when she was raising me financially. It wasn't that easy. My father still lived near, but wasn't in my life really. And so my mother paid all the bills. She had to work overtime to buy me. I remember one time she had to work double the hours to buy me a winter jacket. It wasn't like poverty, but it certainly wasn't many steps above, I don't think. And I remember one time she had to use collectible coins to buy a supper, that type of thing. But why I bring that up is because I saw the dignity she had still with that and the compassion she had for others while she did that. In fact, some kid stole my jacket and replaced it with his. They were the same jacket, except for his was older and beat up and torn up. Mine even had my name inside, so it wasn't like a mistake. And when I told my mother and said, we need to go back and get it, she said, no, I know his family in this situation. He needs it more than us. We'll find a way to get a new one. My mother sort of set the tone that way. And my grandfather was a carpenter with a grade 3 education, ended up building a fiberglass space shuttle replica to scale. And when a lot of other people with, that were teaching carpentry courses turned it down, he also got offered a class to teach a carpentry course, even though he only had a grade 3 education, because he was so well liked and he was so skilled. And so I bring that up and go into that much detail because those two people I can still see to this day were my really biggest influences that I witnessed growing up. And yeah, so, I mean, you can ask any questions, we can dive in deeper to that, but that's kind of the start of my life. Small town, meat and potatoes type town. Everybody, most people, your word is as strong as your oak. You left your doors unlocked. Some of them still do, so that type of situation.
The need to have closure in any given situation is sheer human nature. And when it comes to romantic relationships, this desire skyrockets. Has your previously failed relationship left you in immense pain? It's not uncommon for people to shy away from a new relationship after their first one fails miserably. The fear of the unknown makes them hide in a shell to prevent any future heartbreak. Relatable? Despite wanting to love and be loved, you can't take the plunge if your mind and heart are still locked somewhere in the past. Maybe you aren't aware of the power of releasing the past, or perhaps you don't know how to do it. Art Costello in his online course teaches the art of moving on from bad places to happier, more stable ones. This course can change your life for good, helping you beat all kinds of negativity on the road to eternal bliss. Sign up now before the gloominess gets the better of you at expectationacademy.com.
I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. The difference in how you had an example, a great example of a mom who you knew loved you and cared about you and was setting expectations for you, and not only doing it in verbally, but she was also doing it in example. And for me, it was the opposite. I had a mom that was there, but was not there for me or my sister. So it's very much different. And then having a grandfather around you, I had no male influence. My dad was around. He came home once a week because he worked away. So for me, it was different. But, do you think that the expectations that you set as a child how much influence has that had on your life and now what you've done? Because you've done some incredible things with your speaking, not only teaching others to speak, but sharing your message with the world through your speaking engagements.
That's an interesting question because as a kid, I think more than anything, and it's funny because, sometimes we say the word dreamer and we think non-doer. And there's certainly that, there's certainly people that dream big, but never take action. And of course, as a kid, I wasn't necessarily taking action, but the one thing I had was I was a dreamer. So I was creative and I was a dreamer. And so I had big expectations for myself from as long as I can remember. Like I was that guy that always visualized what my life was going to look like. Now, I didn't visualize I was going to be a speaker. I didn't know that was an option. I didn't visualize how it was going to play out. In fact, if you were to ask me what I most visualized myself being, it would have been a rock star. And I know that most kids do that, but I was actually, so this is a great example. I visualized myself being a musician and a rock star. And that was before I played the guitar. And I picked up an instrument when I was younger. And the first guitar I got, instead of this sexy electric flying V guitar or something, I got like this old beat up acoustic guitar that was a hand-me-down. And whenever I got that, I still visualized I was going to be this rock star. But the interesting part is I was this person that was, even though financially we didn't have it well, before that, like until I was 9, when my father was in my life, I was kind of spoiled. I was an only child. My grandmother spoiled me. My grandparents really on both sides. My father, I remember bringing home a motor go-kart for me to ride, which none of my friends had. So I was still kind of spoiled at that point in my life. And so when I picked up the guitar, everybody's like, there's no way he'll stick with this. You have to play guitar till your fingers bleed. There's no way he's going to keep playing this. And, I didn't even know if I would, but that's what everybody said. And I just kept, so here's my point of this, is I had this vision, me playing music for a living. And I just wouldn't give up on the idea that I could actually be a musician. And so I jumped in. I had a cousin who was really good at guitar, and he started teaching me stuff. My uncle taught me 3 chords and said, good luck. But I kept at it. And so to make a long story super duper short, is it went from me visualizing I want to be a rock star to, even though I never pursued it in the end as much as I meant to or thought I would, here's the interesting part. I still pursued it more than most. I actually played guitar, and this is why I bring this up, is I was writing music when I was 12. I wrote a song that ended up my first CD when I was 12.
Wow.
And so I kept writing and kept recording. And so ultimately today, I haven't done anything with music in a bit, but I have 4 CDs. I have a music video. My album was nominated for Rock Recording of the Year. And I actually did summer tours. So this is the whole thing about that, Art, is that started, this vision of I want to be a rock star started when I was 7 or 8. And I actually pursued it quite a bit, considering it was a part-time thing. And not many people do that. So having said all that, I think one thing I did have going for me as a kid, because you asked about expectations, is I had this vision that I was going to do something. At that point, because it's all I knew, I was a huge music fan. I thought I was going to be with music. And really, I stayed sort of in the entertainment business for some reason. As they say, speakers are edutainers. I didn't know speaking was an option. Maybe I would have been visualizing that. But that was as far as I went with the expectations. But I didn't kind of go, here's what I'm going to do, here's the map, or here's the plan.
Yeah, I don't think anyone ever does. I think that when we're young and we have these dreams, and I knew from an early age that I was going to be something, even though people were telling me I wasn't going to be anything. I knew in my heart and soul that was my expectation, my core expectation. And once you start believing in your core expectations, it really sets the key to your life, how you move through life. And that's just my idea on it. And I think that the key that you mentioned that is really important to me is you're a doer, because dreamers that dream are nothing more than a dreamer, but dreamers that take action become the doers of the deeds that change the world. And that is what makes the difference in each and every one of us, because there's millions of people out there that have dreams every day, but they don't take action on them. Can you identify what made you take action? There's something that triggers us to take action. It can be as significant as a major event in our lives, like I know that you mentioned something that I had a similar thing that it actually triggered mine is when I had a lot before I was 9 years old. My parents lived in a very nice house and all that. And then at 9, they moved to a farm that I was totally isolated, and I lost baseball in my life. And baseball was everything to me. Mm-hmm. And when I lost that, I became very depressed. But that depression led me to become introspective and examine myself. And I used to go to the top of this hill and have this conversation with God about what was going to become of me. And I heard this voice that just said, you just got to do right. And it became the mantra for my life. What was it for you?
So if I looked at maybe the two things that helped me, I think the fact that it was music helped because it was, so I'll add a third actually. I was passionate about music and I was passionate about different things, but that's the strongest area of my life where I could see what passion really was, because there's a lot of people go their whole life and never taste what passion is. Well, music gave me that. So I think first of all, having a passion for it gave me the extra drive. Now, I don't mean like the life or financially or fame or anything else that the rock stars had, but I want to have that feeling that they had of being able to live their passion, if you will. So I think that was one thing. It was a desire to do it was stronger than the fear of not doing it, if you will.
There you go. That's a big one.
It's a huge one. And, I asked an Olympian one time that was terrified of public speaking, and now she speaks for a living. How did you do it? And she said, because the desire to share the message that I had was stronger than my fear of actually doing it. And so she said it allowed me, it had not allowed her, she said it forced her basically to actually conquer it. So that's one. But if I look at two other ones, my mother was a doer, and I was watching her, despite all the things I just said she had going against her, out there doing. And then the third one, I feel, which was a big part of it, was my friends, my network of friends who are also musicians. And one of them in particular, his name was Mike Dixon. And funny, for a living today, he's a musician. And I think it was because all of our friends, we were all that passionate about music that we were, even before we were playing instruments, we were doing lip syncing in the variety shows. And so I think having that group of friends that was just as passionate, and Mike and I both being people that were active with it, like writing music. And I think that stuff made me a doer, because I had an influencing group, like almost like I won't say they were mentors. They were kind of like we were all equal, but we were mentoring each other. So that was a long tangent to say those are all three. I think the passion for music was the biggest one, though.
Yeah, you don't know this about me, but I was in the music business. After I came back from Vietnam, I went to college, and then during college, my roommate was a musician, built harpsichords, keyboard, guitar. I mean, he built all his own instruments, actually whittled the ivory for the keys on his harpsichords and pianos that he built. And just great guy. And he walked into the house one day and said, "Hey, I can't find any work, anything for our band." And I just said to him, I said, "I'll find your work." So I became their manager.
Wow.
And pretty soon they were working all the way from LA, Whiskey A Go-Go, the Troubadour, all the high-end spots up in LA, all the big clubs, all the way to San Diego where we lived. And I ended up with having like 5 or 6 bands that I managed during that time. And then I went to work for Jose Feliciano that wrote Feliz Navidad and Light My Fire and all those songs back in the late 60s. And I stayed with it. And that's why when I was telling you with traveling, it gets old living on the road. people don't realize it. And we talked about that briefly before we started. But, for me, it's always been, I've seen an opportunity. And when I see opportunities, I jump on them. Or if I see people in need, and I know that they need something and that I have the capability to fulfill it, I jump on it. It's just my nature. I don't know what ever did it, why I'm that way, other than that I just know that I like to make things happen. It's just part of me. I like to make things happen for people.
Has anyone ever inspired you to discover a happier, healthier, and more fulfilled you? It is a magical experience, isn't it? Inspiration is indeed very powerful, yet it's often undermined. It can lift you from the ground to the sky in no time. Have you ever thought about returning the favor by inspiring the people around you? If you don't think you have it in you, we have good news for you. Art Costello's online course has everything you need to learn to supercharge yourself and shape your character into a powerful personality. Get ready to discover your strengths and unleash the creativity within. Don't believe it? Check it out yourself by signing up for this life-changing course at expectationacademy.com. That's expectationacademy.com.
When you were in the music business and you were playing, you said it was your passion. How did you identify that was your passion?
So, okay, here's where it gets really tricky. And it's not the common answer about this, is I didn't actually identify it was. And so I didn't even know this idea or concept of a passion or what's your purpose or any of that stuff. And in fact, I can tell you when I finally was able to figure out what that looked like and then reverse engineer and see that music had been a passion all this time. And maybe the one thing that fueled me and kept me positive in many ways, because I went through a bout of negativity to the point where I had hypochondria for a few years and anxiety. And so I hadn't discovered my core passion yet. And that's when it all changed. It literally, like almost overnight, it was like I took some powerful, I call it vitamin P, but some powerful vitamin and it got rid of it like that. But the music was probably what helped me all those years without me realizing it. So I can't honestly say I identified it as a passion. And in fact, I didn't even till after I discovered what my true passion was, I didn't realize music had been a passion all that time, which sounds naive. Like, how could you not know? But I knew I was excited by music. I knew I was obsessed with music. I knew I loved it, but I didn't know it was a passion.
Yeah, I think that that's pretty common, though, because we don't recognize our passions at the time. It's only when we reflect back and we see and think about it and put some effort into really the identification process that we start identifying what our passions are, and which leads me to the point of, that sometimes it takes maturity. Mm-hmm. We have to become mature in our, actually, I'm going to rephrase that. We have to become emotionally intelligent. We have to be able to identify our emotions and feelings and put them in context to our lives. And that comes with maturity.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I think the reason for me, and even so, when I was able to identify all this and it all came to life for me, was when I was in my mid-20s. So that was still relatively early, but I'll tell you, there was a catalyst. There was a catalyst behind why I identified it, because I don't even know if I would have identified it even then, but it was because I had this anxiety inside, I had this hypochondria and all this stuff, and it all disappeared within 24 hours. Like, it was like a miracle. Now, I say that, I mean, I think probably that first part, it wasn't that it had disappeared, it was just that I was over the moon. It's almost like you're in lust in a relationship early on, and like people that have anxieties and stuff and get in a first relationship, when the first excitement's happening, they forget they have anxieties. So I think there was probably some of that at first, but then it was legit gone because it never came back. But to take you to that, that situation, essentially what happened was, basically it was in my mid-20s, as I mentioned. This was in 2002 ish, and I had put a stage play in a festival that I'd written, and I wouldn't write myself a part because I was so terrified of speaking and being in front of an audience. And, here I was a musician for those years. And by the way, I should add that as a musician, I had recorded music. I had been on stage a handful of times, but I still really hadn't conquered that fear. But I was on stage, but I wouldn't talk to the audience, really. It was just like, here's another song I wrote, that type of thing. And so I still hadn't conquered any fear of the stage. In fact, it was only that I had a guitar in my hands that gave me the comfort, and I was terrified doing it. But what happened was I was terrified of also being on a stage in this play I wrote. And then one of the actors injured himself, and he was the lead actor, and we couldn't replace him. But because he injured I think he sprained his ankle is what it was. And so we couldn't get backstage quick enough to do all the costume changes. So we had to buy him time. So we had to kind of make the bit players have more time on the stage, and I needed an extra person. So I wrote a part, but it was too late to find somebody that knew the lines and could work off the lines. So I actually had to write myself a part. So I put on a wig and a Hulk Hogan t-shirt or a Triple H t-shirt, a wrestling t-shirt, and I walked out with my back to the audience. And I did the whole play with my back to the audience because that's how terrified I was. And the actor that was speaking to me had to watch me covered in sweat because I was so terrified, but the audience didn't see that. And then I would wobble back off, just like these two little small bits. And so what happened was at the end of the play's run, I said to one of my actors, how can I conquer this fear, do you think? And he said, well, I don't know if this is the answer, but I heard about this stand-up comedy workshop at the university. If you want to give it a go, I'm going to go take it. And so I said, that sounds terrifying. I'm in. And so I went and took this 2-week workshop where all we got taught was how to adjust the mic stand, basically. And the third week we were told we were going to watch comics entertain us. So we went to a local comedy club. We did the marketing to fill the club. And then we found out about 5 minutes to showtime that we were, in fact, the comics. So I basically had been to one Toastmasters meeting in my life and learned if you're going to face a fear like this, go up first. So they were all debating who's going to go up first. I went into the bathroom to try to recompose myself, and I came back, and out of the 15 that were there originally, 8 were gone. So they walked at the front door. 7 were left. I jumped up on stage, told my first joke to dead silence, told the second joke to dead silence. And for anybody wondering, I've said this many times, but 30 seconds of silence on a stand-up stage is about 172 years in real time. And it's worse than being heckled, because at least with a heckler, you can do something with that. And so I got hit with the worst thing you could ever get hit with of my first 2 jokes, only to find out it was because I didn't have the mic turned on. And then we got the mic turned on. I told the same 2 jokes, and they bombed again. So I've now said I'm probably one of the only comics who's bombed with the same material twice within 10 minutes. But having said all that, where I'm getting with this is after all of that, I got off that stage. The next day, I realized I had survived. And I was at work, and people were like, did you fall in love or something? Because you just have a jump in your step. And that was the first sort of indicator that, wait a minute, there's something here. 5 minutes of stage time, and I was jumping around at work with a smile on my face. And so then I needed to explore this. And then over a course of a short amount of time, the anxiety and hypochondria was 100% gone. And what was interesting about this art is I didn't realize at that point, and not until probably close to a year, and maybe even not fully within a year, but I didn't realize that it wasn't my true passion. So my true passion, which is what I've done ever since, is speaking on stages. And I feel the music and the comedy were kind of priming me up to discover what the real one was. But what's interesting is they all helped each other. So I mentioned earlier on the stage as a musician, I couldn't talk to the audience. And I'm not going to say it was overnight, but after a couple of years, I went from that guy that would say, this is my song called Waiting, I hope you enjoy it, to the guy that was going into the details of Waiting and talking to the audience and saying, how many people have heard the song, and like actually interacting with the audience. And it changed everything. As a musician, I became probably stronger interacting with the audience than I was as a musician in the first place.
What you did is you learned. I mean, you went through a series of behavioral events that taught you to get over your fear and move through it. And the end results, the rewards, are what keep you going. And I know that you've spoken to, I wouldn't even venture to guess how many speaking engagements you've done, but I know in our intro that you've worked with some of the top leaders in the world. How did your speaking progress out from the music into this dynamic, life-changing stuff that you do now, speaking engagements that you do?
Okay, so interestingly enough, there's 2 sides to it. So the interviews had actually started, me doing interviews with business leaders, had started way before any of this, which is kind of ironic, because you would actually think that the music and all that stuff would have triggered the rest, and the comedy would have triggered the rest. But the interview side of it that you mentioned about interviewing leaders and working with leaders, that actually started early on. It's just I wasn't interviewing, let's say, world-known leaders. I was interviewing small business owners. that started even before all of this stuff. I had started a little newspaper when I was really young and like 19. And so that was another example of the doing, if you will, because I willed my way through it. I mean, we thought we were going to sell this newspaper on the shelves, and then we found out people aren't going to buy this on the shelves. So we had to sell advertising, which we never sold a thing in our life before. And I walked into doors covered in sweat. It was the hardest thing at the time I'd ever done. But that sort of was a little moment in the backstory and background that sort of helped fuel this as well. And that's how the interview started. And then they disappeared for a while and then came back. But I did become obsessed interviewing people. So that was one thing that happened. And still to this day, I mean, interviewing, I mean, it's over 5,000 now. I'm obsessed with it. That's one thing. But in terms of how the music evolved and we talked about the comedy, and then I was doing both at the same time. And then what happened, how the comedy evolved into the speaking was after about a year of this, I saw Tony Robbins live. And something triggered in me, which I don't know why I'd never asked this question before with Tony Robbins. And I'd heard, went into sales for years and I discovered Zig Ziglar. And so I heard of some of these motivational speakers, but for whatever reason, especially with Tony Robbins and Zig Ziglar, I thought that what these guys did was they went on stages and spoke to sell their product. Like I never thought for a million years they were getting paid to speak. I didn't think that was the thing. And then what happened was somebody either said to me, imagine how much he's getting paid for this? Or I said, is this dude getting paid for this? And then I Googled it. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You can get paid to do this? You know, and I'm doing stand-up comedy paying like $5 in gas to go to a club that sometimes they pay me $5 from the door. You know, and so I was like, whoa, this is new. This is different. And so I said, I want to check this out more. So what happened was I spent almost a year. Now, I was in sales at this point. That was my actual career, trying to sell a local community college on why they should let me teach their first sales course. As it was not kind of appropriate, I had to sell them on a sales course. But I ended up selling them on a sales course. And then what happened was I started teaching there as a business studies instructor. That was my first foray into any kind of speaking, training, anything. It was a good starting point because you're only speaking to a group of 8 or 10 or 15 people in a classroom. But what happened is some of the people would call and say, look, we have 40 people we'd love to send, but we can't shut down the whole company. Is there any way we can bring him in here? And then the college would say, well, we don't care. That's all. We'll ask him. And then the college would ask me, and I'm like, okay, that sounds good. And what was really good about that is that they want to send 40 or 50 people, and it was say $400 a person if they attended the course. So it made it so that I could charge more than I should have ever been able to charge for my first talks because, you know, I could charge $1,000 and they were still saving tons of money. Now, those are the only talks I could do that. I was still at the same time realizing that I had to do most of my talks for free. But the point of this, Art, is that's how you asked how the transition happened. That's how the transition started, is I actually slowly eked my way in. But here's the key thing, why I said it was a slower process, is I thought it was going to be a build it and they will come. I thought because I had been in sales for a while, because I had had all these clients in my sales career, I thought I was just going to announce, I'm a speaker, and people are going to show up at the door knocking saying, how do we give you money? And I found out what was more true is something I heard on a CD one time early on when I was listening to, and I dived into learning from, I went to Association for Professional Speakers and got the CD and I listened to it. All my drives as a salesperson, I would listen to the CD about becoming a speaker. And I remember hearing this person say it at once and I thought, he's full of it. And then I come to find out he was right. He said, when you first start, you'll almost pay somebody $50 to listen to you speak on the corner of the road. And he said, and then, you know, and later, much later, then people will be paying you to speak. And I thought the much later would come earlier for me. I somehow thought I was special. The world of professional speaking lightened me and woke me up real quick.
Don't know which direction you want your life to take? Are you sinking deep down into the pit of uncertainties day by day? So, what's the secret to leading a happy, satisfied life? It's taking matters into your own hands. But what if the matters in question are a total blur? Art Costello's Expectation Academy course aims to tell you exactly how you can get some clarity in your life. This course can be your savior on your journey to reinventing yourself. While you certainly can't plan your whole future ahead, you can definitely control twists and turns your life takes. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for this course now at expectationacademy.com. Get a chance to broaden your horizons and add meaning to your life. That's expectationacademy.com.
Do you have any tips for the audience out there, that somebody that might want to become a speaker? Do you have any tips that, that you give?
Yeah, so I'll give you a tip that covers probably 25 tips. So it was a game changer moment for me. There's certain areas I can see that were game changers. And maybe because of me helping other speakers, I've reverse engineered this more than others. Other speakers who might just, if your love is speaking and you don't have a desire to, teach other people to speak, because that's a whole other business all on its own. You may not have reverse engineered to this degree, but I have, because when you start teaching others, you have to really look into why did this work? Why didn't this work? And so one thing that was a game changer for me was this thing that we call an evaluation form. And I'll tell you, a lot of people do this. A lot of times they let the meeting planner do it or the company organizer do it. Like the organizer will say, well, we're going to hand out evaluation forms or whatever, and we'll let you know what people thought of you, that type of thing. And to me, there's the odd case where you can't control this, but in most cases you can. I think that is one of the biggest, let's call it, disservices you can do to yourself, is leave that in someone else's hands. So the evaluation form changed everything for me, and I'm going to explain how. But another thing I have to add is today, there's a tendency to want to say with the evaluation form, people say, can I just email it to you later? Or the organization will say, we're just going to use an app. And my experience is the organization, usually it's their first time doing it, and they discover quickly that you get 5% of the people that'll actually fill it out later. If they say, can we send yours in later, email to you, you'll get less than 5%. Here's the best way to do it is you have an evaluation form that's crafted to get certain answers out of the attendees, and then you hand it out. Usually I'll hand it out, if possible, beforehand, and say I'll explain the evaluation form later or whatever that looks like. You can have it on the front desk and they hand it out, or you can, if you have to, you can go to the people in the room and get them to hand it out for you. But the bottom line is what you want them to have a pen or a pencil and that evaluation form in front of them right after your talk's done. So why this is significant, it's what's said on that evaluation form. So I've crafted mine over the years, but here's the nuts and bolts of it. The first question is, what did you hear today that you could use tomorrow? How will you use what you heard today that it's starting tomorrow? What do you wish Corey would have covered that he didn't? Now, those questions are important because the person filling it out knows, okay, this is about me. It's not just about the speaker. But at the same time, I always tell them, look, if I don't know of it, I don't grow. So your feedback will help the next group and help me get better for the next group. So then people feel good, like they're like, I'm helping somebody else too. So there's a whole bunch of psychology I put into this one little evaluation form. But here's where it gets really deep. The next question, and I'm going by memory, but the next question is, do you know of others who could benefit from a similar talk to the one I presented today? And if so, can we contact you to follow up with them? That one question became responsible for about 30% of my early bookings. So I was having a tough time getting bookings. And here's the rub. I don't believe you should speak for free, but there's lots of good reasons to speak for no fee, which some people would say the same thing, but I think there's a psychology behind this word free. So I'll speak for no fee. I don't anymore, but I spoke a lot for no fee early on for the purpose of getting my evaluation form out so that I could learn, I could grow, because I wanted to learn and grow from their comments, but also that would get me those leads because they would fill out that form. So you got to make sure you get in front of the right audiences. So I would go to a business group like a chamber where they had multiple businesses in the room, get them to fill out my form, and let's say out of 100 people, 5 filled out that part that said, we could bring you in to speak at our vet company, and then maybe 3 turn into actually paid bookings. So that's how I started getting those bookings early on with that one question. And then I'll finish this off and say, here's why this evaluation form can be even more powerful, is I also had a question, can we add you to our newsletter list? So all of a sudden, if a group of 100 people, usually 70 would say yes. So now all of a sudden I was adding 70 people to my newsletter I could market to in the future every talk. Then a big one too is, can we use your comments in conjunction with our marketing? So all of a sudden now in a room of 100 people, if 70 said, yeah, we loved your talk, I now had 70 testimonials from separate business owners. So in my first talk, potentially, I could have 70 testimonials versus the guy who has to go one at a time if he's just trying to get them from the company owner or the CEO. So, and in fact, if I wanted, I could go into one company and their employees could all give testimonials. And I don't have to, if I don't put the company name, I could just put testimonials for each individual person and still have, multiple testimonials from my first talk. And then the additional comments, I would get a bunch of extra little insight there. So you said about tips, that one evaluation form could be game changer for somebody who's brand new.
Corey, all I want to say about this is thank you for giving my audience one of the greatest tips that we've ever had on this show for actually applying it to your craft to where it can, because what you just did was very selfless and really a great giving gift to my audience. Because if you're thinking about a speaker, I was sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, this is like gold nuggets. I mean, to build your business, to build your speaking business. I want to shift gears a little bit, but I wanted to get this question in because I think it's going to be interesting. What's the difference between a speaker and a storyteller?
So great question, but I also wanted to take a second to say thank you so much for that kind, humbling comment you just shared, because that made my day. So thank you. I just wanted to add that in. I didn't want to not acknowledge that. Storyteller, speaker. Okay, so I'll tell you what I feel the difference is, but I'll start with a caveat that I don't think there should be a difference. So in other words, I think a lot of people would learn from the power of becoming a storyteller / speaker. I think they should be both the same. So even people that will say they're not speakers, but you go to storytelling festivals, I would argue that those people are some of the best speakers you're ever going to see. And comics are great storytellers. And I would argue that comics are some of the best speakers you'll ever see. In fact, I would argue that comics study speaking more than most professional speakers you'll ever see. Because comics, and I think speakers could learn from this too, will record all of their early, in fact, some will record every performance they ever do, but they'll record the performances, a 10-minute set, and then go home and study that for 5 or 10, 15 hours. What went wrong here? What went wrong there? And a lot of times these guys aren't getting paid a penny to do this, but they're studying, why did the story work? Why did the craft work? How I developed that story? How did I craft this setup and punchline? So my first answer is I don't think they should be separate, but your question is very telling because they are separate. Here's the thing. Here's the rub. I would say, and this is a bold statement, and I don't mean this disparagingly because I am a lover of speaking and lover of speakers, but I would say it's a small number of speakers who can hold an audience in their palm of their hands, and I wish it were more. And I feel one of the gateways to being able to do that is storytelling. So what I'm getting at here, it depends on what you categorize as a speaker, but if we look at every person that's out presenting today somewhere in the world as a speaker, even if it's the first talk ever, that's what I'm getting at when I'm saying it's a small percentage of the ones that are doing it at a world-class level. And so why I think that is, or feel it is because they haven't learned the craft of storytelling. They haven't learned, and this is another big part of what we talked about earlier, how to make sure they're passionate about what they're speaking on. And if they're not, they better find a different way to speak on it or a different way to be passionate about it, because otherwise it's going to be one of those presentations we watched where we're watching our watch, or worse than that, we're asleep so we don't get a chance to look at our watch. And so my answer to this is that I think that they're separate in a lot of cases and shouldn't be. So a storyteller is somebody who has an ability, a good storyteller, of course, that's the important part there, to hold us in the palm of their hands and take us where they want to take us within their story and within the emotion of the story and within the engagement within the story. Whereas a speaker who doesn't do that and doesn't have that trait or ability, there's a lot of times they might have great content, but we're sitting there going, when's this over? And so, again, I'm trying to stay away from knocking one or the other, but I think they should be linked together. So to me, I feel that a great speaker should be a masterful storyteller. And I feel that everything starts with story. So the rub and challenge here is some people will say, well, I'm not a good storyteller. What I'm here to say is it's a muscle. I wasn't a good storyteller either. And I'm a type A personality I used to have the tendency where I would start one story and I still fall back into this sometimes. And then I'll jump onto another one before I finish the first one. But then I'll catch myself usually now and say, okay, before I jump ahead there, let me go back a step. And luckily I can still remember where I was going to go, because it gets disjointed if you started a thing and don't jump back to that. So my point is you can learn to become a good storyteller. And I would say anybody who wants to get into speaking that isn't in it yet, or even people that are in speaking now that don't use story, I feel you need to work that muscle. I mentioned about music early on, and I played till my fingers bled, and I was terrible on guitar, and I was a year before I could play one song. So it's not like I was natural at playing guitar or playing music, and I was tone deaf. I couldn't tune my guitar by ear. I couldn't play a song by ear. So I believe you can learn any skill, and so I think storytelling is another one of those, but I think you owe it to your audience to learn how to become a storyteller. So I know this is a long tangent and isn't directly saying, here's the core difference. It's because I don't believe there should be a difference, but I believe right now we have a difference. And so that difference to me is a speaker that isn't telling a story is maybe somebody who's delivering a lecture. And to me, a speaker who's telling a story is somebody who is actually sharing a moving message. So that would be my difference. And I mean, I can dive in for a second if you want in terms of some of the ways you can engage an audience. But to me, that's the separation is I would say it's the difference between a lecture, which there's nothing wrong with it, more educational, maybe not a whole lot of stories. It might be just here's the message and lessons I want to share with you, versus somebody who takes you along for the ride emotionally.
Yeah, I always thought when, having done some limited speaking, and I'd noticed that sometimes I see speakers talking numbers and facts, and it almost becomes like a college lecture where they're teaching you something, where storytellers just have this story that just unfolds, and the message is buried in it, and you have to dig sometimes to find it. But I was going to tell you about when I do speak, one of the biggest reactions I have after I speak are people crying.
Well, that's a good sign.
Well, I know it's a good sign, but for a while, it scared me, because I thought, oh my God, and people would come up and say things to me that how they were going to change their life. And it wasn't always in the best of ways. And I'll give you an example. I would have women come up and men come up and say, I'm going home and leaving my spouse tonight because of your story.
Wow.
And I go, oh my God, what did I just do? I didn't mean to break up a marriage. I wanted to show you that there is always something better out there in life. But then my wife said to me, she said, maybe that's exactly what they needed to do. Maybe they were in a destructive relationship. Maybe they were being held back, and maybe you just release them to become who they're meant to be. And, that started to make sense to me, that those tears were tears of not only, maybe joy and happiness, but, of also just identifying with what I've been through in my life and how I've overcome it. But, storytelling touches the heart, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And I will say, it'd be easy. And I've been doing this long enough, Art, that there's never an absolute I've discovered. So that's why I shy away. Maybe years ago, I would have said, here's the absolute difference. But now I've learned since then. And I'll give you an example. If you go by the definition that I sort of implied, then I'll give you an example of two people. Lisa Nichols. I'm not sure if you're familiar with who Lisa is.
I'm familiar, but...
Okay. So Lisa Nichols, for those watching, listening that maybe don't know Lisa, she was in The Secret. She's a Mind Valley teacher. She wrote Chicken Soup for the African American Soul, both volumes, I believe. And Lisa is a very dynamic speaker, and she's a storyteller too. So she shares stories about how, her and her son were struggling financially to the point where she couldn't afford diapers. And then she tells you this story in that case about how she put money away every week when she was finally working, little bits of money, and how she didn't check the account balance. And then she found out how much it actually was. And it blew her mind. It was 60-some thousand she had put away over a certain amount of time. And, she tells this amazing story built around that. And I love the end of her story where she said, when she walked out the door, her son said, she said to her son, Giovanni, I think our life's about to change. And he said, does this mean I can finally try McDonald's?
Oh, wow.
And so, but it kind of tells you how much of a struggle they had financially. But I mean, she tells this whole story and story that people in the audience are crying because they can relate. And, maybe a single mother changes the way they do things because of it. But that's an example to me of a storytelling speaker. Let's put it that way. But now here's an example of somebody who's not necessarily a storytelling speaker, who still moves people into action. So this is why I stayed away from saying a storyteller moves you to action and a speaker does maybe teaches you something. But a speaker that's not a storyteller can still move you to action. I'll give you a classic example of somebody who I think was constantly voted one of the best speakers of all time, who wasn't necessarily a storyteller, and is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs didn't layer a whole lot of story into his talks. His talks are they definitely were planned and prepared, but he had obviously a very natural way of doing it. And he made you feel like this is what his passion, he believed what he was saying, and so much so it didn't even feel like he prepared it, but he didn't layer stories in. So he would say, we got this new product. He did all the fundamental things, though, that great speakers do. Like he would work in threes, which is a thing that speakers learn. There's more power in working with threes than people learn in threes. He would engage the audience. How many of you have ever had this experience? Like he did all those things, but he wasn't necessarily a storyteller, and yet he still was one of the best presenters / speakers of all time. So that's why I stayed away from just saying, because I do believe a storyteller more often will move you into action, but I don't believe it's absolute. And that's good news for somebody who doesn't want to become a storyteller or doesn't feel they're a good storyteller. But I will say a storyteller, a good one, is always going to have an easier time of it when it comes to impacting an audience and working a stage.
Yeah, I don't believe in absolutes anyway. So, I mean, I think when you believe in absolutes, you limit yourself. You put a bind on your thinking. My mantra is I believe in the possibility of everything. Everything is possible.
100%. I love
You
that.
know, yeah. I mean, if you don't, you start limiting how you think. And my mind is so open to everything. When it comes to learning, I'm like a vacuum. I mean, I just want to take it in, and that's just how I've lived my life. And I think that that's why I've been able to do some of the things I have, because I don't put any limits on myself. And I think that that's important. We're hitting almost an hour and it's gone so darn fast. And I wanted to give you time to tell us about I don't even want to say this word. I was going to ask you to give us some golden nuggets, but you've given us so many. Why don't you tell us about what you've got coming up, where people can get a hold of you, and we'll leave that with the audience so they can reach out to you.
Yeah, so, well, thank you so much for that, Art. And basically, I mean, I'll say the most present thing because the truth is I'm a multi-passionite. So I always have a few things on the go, and I can see how they're all linked, but sometimes other people are like, well, how's that related to this? So I try to stay away from giving people too much, because I think in the world we're in today, we're all overwhelmed. We're all hit with so much. I'll keep it pretty congruent to one specific thing. So how I work with most people, how I ultimately end up working with people is through my speaking program. And so I have a speaking program where I help people basically navigate the waters, and even in some cases find out if they want to become a speaker, but navigate the waters and essentially teach them what it took me almost 20 years now in the speaking trenches, getting paid to do this weekly, almost 20 years to learn. I try to teach them my 20 years in a short amount of time. And so, or at least the high level stuff. And so within that speaking program, that's where I end up working with a lot of people. So I'll at least tell people, I guess, how you can connect with me further if you want to learn more about that. But I'll add in a value to this as well. So you said about value bomb or knowledge nugget, or bring in some extra value, is that I'll give some gifts away, actually. And it's also a way to learn from me, but also learn more about me and connect with me. We have a book called The Book of Public Speaking. And so for your listeners, if they want to go to thebookofpublicspeaking.com, pretty easy website to remember, thebookofpublicspeaking.com. They can grab a free copy there. And then the second thing I've started to do recently, which is a really big move for me, because I'm one of those people that I don't do much one-on-one coaching. And so it's rare for me to do this, but I'm actually starting now to do 15-minute strategy calls with people where I can help them decide if I'm a fit for them, if they're a fit for me, and or if this is something that's of interest to them. But if somebody wants to schedule that, we do it on specific days. So they can reach out to me. The easiest, shortest path is email. So thatspeakerguy@gmail.com. Again, thatspeakerguy@gmail.com. And, once you send that email, once I reply to you, all my contact stuff is there as well. The one last thing, and I don't want to give people too many different directions, but my main website is thatspeakerguy.com. And so on there, that it has my TEDx talks, it has the social media links. Basically, any way you want to connect with me, that's sort of the channel. But those other two ways are more so free gifts. Because the 15-minute strategy session, you can probably tell by my personality, I'll make sure people leave with some extra value, even if they decide that it's not a fit to do anything in the speaking realm at this point. But like I said, Art, I think that's the best way to do it, even though I have a lot of other things on the go. And if they get into my network, they'll see those things. But I don't want to bring people in multiple different directions. So since we talked about speaking, that's the core one. And I will add, we launched recently a thing called Blue Talks, which is a branded series, similar to, let's say, Goalcast or TEDx or TED. So we launched Blue Talks, which stands for Business Life Universe. And we're finally actually basically offering our own platform for speakers to take stages as well. And we've already done 3 of them, even though we just launched less than a month ago. And the next one is going to take place at Harvard. So lots of big things coming up.
Wow, that's amazing. Corey, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. And just you're finishing out, I thought of 3 other things that I wanted to ask that we didn't get to. So we're going to have to do this again sometime. But everybody out there in the audience, as usual, everything Corey has mentioned in the show will be in the show notes for you to locate. And I'm going to, as usual, encourage you to reach out. If you're even thinking about speaking or just want to connect with him to learn about how becoming a better communicator, reach out to Corey, because he's a great guy and he is full of these nuggets and he's got a big heart. So that's really, really great. And I appreciate you being on the show, Corey.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, Art. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I won't say the pleasure is all mine. I think it's mutual pleasure. I think we both enjoyed this. So, and I, you know what? Lisa Nichols said to me in my recent interview with her that she said, this is a dance that we do together. And she said, it's always important that you have the right person on the other side. And so this is my way of saying to you that none of this would happen if you weren't asking brilliant questions. And I will add as well, you asked me some questions today I've never been asked before and never asked myself. And I've done 5,000 interviews plus, and I've been interviewed thousands of times. So you asked questions I've never been asked or asked anybody else and got things out of me I've never shared ever in a public capacity. So thank you for being you.
Well, thank you much for that. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, it's been another great show, and Corey and I are going to do this again. As he said, once you make the connection and we learn from each other, it kind of grows on you. And Corey and I are growing on each other. And I hope he grows on you guys. You know where you can get a hold of me, expectationtherapy.com. Heather White, can you take us out of here?
Thanks for listening to the show. Drop us your comments and questions with what you want answered on the show. You can subscribe on iTunes and Binge Network. You can also get more information on the website, expectationtherapy.com.